It was supposed to be a quick trip for some milk, just a regular run to the local convenience store before it closed. But the moment the manager voice cracked, shouting, "There's here," I knew something was wrong. Their once ordinary night shifted into something much darker. The doors locked, the lights dimmed, and suddenly, I wasn't just a customer anymore. I was trapped, alone with the terrified staff. We had no choice but to wait and hope wherever they were wouldn't find us.
"They're here." The words escaped the manager's lips, her voice filled with desperation and panic, each syllable sounding like it was dragged out of her. The cashier's face mirrored that sentiment, shifting from exhaustion to sheer dread, her eyes wide with a horrible kind of awareness. Meanwhile, another employee, who had been quietly standing behind the counter, quickly got up and disappeared into the back of the store. It was just past 9:30 p.m. My day had been packed, an exam and multiple quizzes across my classes, capped off with a tough session at the gym. When I got home, I realized I was out of milk, so I headed down to the convenience store beneath my apartment. The store closed at 10, so I figured I had enough time to grab some milk and maybe browse the snack aisle. After failing to find anything else of interest, I approached the counter to check out, my milk in hand. By this time, I was the only customer left in the store, aside from the 3 employees. I wondered, who are they? Maybe a maintenance crew arriving early? But the store hadn't closed yet. I grabbed my milk and made for the door. The manager stepped in front of me, her demeanor grim. "We can't let you leave right now. It's not safe. You'll have to wait here until they pass." Frustrated and confused, I blurted out, "Who are they?" The manager didn't answer immediately. She took a breath, shook her head, and then, without another word, turned around to pull down the metal blinds along the front of the store. Something wasn't right. It wasn't even time to close yet. I decided I wasn't sticking around to play whatever weird game this was. I started for the door, but froze as soon as I saw the figure outside. Standing there, just on the other side of the glass, was a man in an old-fashioned but fine suit, topped off with a tall hat. He looked like a stockbroker from the 1920s, out of place and out of time. Before I could make sense of it, a scream echoed from behind me. I whipped around to see the cashier, hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she stared at me in horror. The manager rushed back to the front, her eyes locked onto mine, and, seeing the man outside, she barked at me. "Get away from the door. Now." Without questioning, I stepped back toward her. Before I could even ask what was happening, she issued another command, her voice tight with fear. "Go hide behind the aisles. Don't come out until I tell you. If you don't listen, you'll die. Now go." I couldn't understand any of this, but something in her tone, or perhaps the fear in her eyes, convinced me to obey. I set the milk down on the counter and darted to the far corner of the store, hiding between the shelves. My phone was useless. It wouldn't turn on, even though I was sure it had enough battery when I left my apartment. Great. Just great. I could hear the manager speaking softly to the cashier, trying to calm her down. Minutes passed, and then the automatic doors slid open. Slow, measured footsteps echoed through the store, each one magnified in the oppressive silence. They stopped at the counter, and for a few seconds, the quiet was so thick you could almost touch it. Then a man's voice, warm and friendly, broke the silence. "Good evening." The cashier stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Hello. Would you kindly point me to where I might find your store's meats?" From the safety of the aisle, I peered around the corner. The man from outside was now standing in front of the counter. He was taller than I had thought, his impeccable posture adding to his already intimidating height, making him seem almost unnatural. His voice was polite, but something about him sent a chill down my spine. "We have lunch meat, turkey, ham. In that section over there," the cashier managed to say, her voice barely holding together. The man cut her off, his smile unwavering. "Oh no, my dear. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I was informed there would be fresh, recently harvested meats available for purchase." The cashier was at a loss for words, stammering out, I don't understand. I think you do. He didn't move. He stood there like a statue, smiling down at her as if waiting for something. The tension was unbearable. The manager stepped forward, calm but cautious, speaking from behind him. "Sir, how can we assist you?" The man turned slowly, locking eyes with her, his smile never faltering. He was disturbingly handsome, perfectly groomed, with flawless skin and gleaming white teeth. "Good evening. As I mentioned, I'm here to purchase freshly harvested meat," he repeated, his voice smooth and cordial. The manager met his gaze, drawing a steady breath before responding. "I'm sorry, sir. We're currently out of fresh stock. If you come back another time, we'll have what you're looking for. I apologize for the inconvenience." For a long moment, he simply stared at her, his smile fading. The stillness in him was unsettling, as though he wasn't entirely human. Finally, his expression softened again, and he nodded. "I understand. I'll return at a more opportune time. Have a pleasant evening." With that, he turned and left the store, the automatic doors sliding shut behind him. The cashier broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The manager, visibly shaken but composed, put her arm around her and led her toward the back. I followed them, my mind reeling. The manager opened a closet door at the back of the store, revealing the third employee, the one who had disappeared earlier. He was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. "Did you reach them?" the manager asked. "They're trying to get here. It's going to take a bit. Can you hold down the front in the meantime?" The manager nodded, helping the crying cashier into the closet before shutting the door and turning back to me. "We're going to be here for a while. I need my staff on the phone and the other one's too shaken up to help. So, you're going to do exactly what I say, or we all die. Understand?" I get it," I said, though I wasn't convinced of anything, least of all my ability to help. Nothing made sense. I didn't know who they were, whether it was the strange man or whoever the employee had been talking to. All I knew was that I needed to follow orders. The manager returned to the counter, taking a deep breath as the automatic doors slid open again. This time, the footsteps that entered were faster, more frantic. She signaled for me to hide again, mouthing the word, "hide," before ducking beneath the counter herself. I barely had time to process before I heard the sick, raspy sound of heavy breathing. It filled the store, the steps growing louder and closer. I realized the thing, whatever it was checking each aisle, moving quickly from one to the next. Soon, it would reach mine. I panicked, my mind racing as I tried to figure out how to avoid being seen. I waited for it to pass down the adjacent aisle and then quietly slipped over to the next one. As it passed, I finally saw it. A pale, hunched figure, grotesque and unnatural. It wasn't human. Its spine jutted out sharply, its limbs too thin, its long fingers tipped with filthy black nails. The thing's face was the worst part, its jaw elongated, filled with long, perfect teeth, its eyes sunken and sickly green. I moved again, just in time, as it finished its sweep and exited through the automatic doors, leaving the store in eerie silence once more. The manager shouted for me to come back. I cautiously approached the front, heart racing. "Get behind the counter. Smile when they do. Don't say a word," she instructed, her voice low. "Smile when who—" I began, but she silenced me with a sharp glance. A child came sprinting through the door. A child? Out here? In this city? At this hour? Why? Where were its parents? Then 6 more followed. They all looked so young, maybe around 5 or 6 years old if I had to guess. They immediately scattered across the store, dashing between the aisles and around the front. It seemed like they were playing some sort of game, maybe tag or hide and seek, laughing and acting just as kids their age usually do. Just let them be and follow my instructions. When they smile, smile back, the manager reminded me. They kept running around for about 5 minutes before suddenly stopping and gathering at the front. They lined up neatly, one after the other, right in front of the counter. Each child reached for a chocolate bar from the small display shelves next to the register, the kind designed to tempt shoppers into impulse buys like snacks and magazines. The first kid approached the register and placed $1 and some change on the counter. It was the exact price of the candy bar. But honestly, in this situation, I doubt anyone would have made a fuss if it hadn't been. After setting down his change, the child turned and locked eyes with me. He stared at me with no expression, much like how children sometimes fixate on strangers for no particular reason. But something about this wasn't right, and soon enough, I found out why these weren't ordinary kids. The child smiled at me, and, as instructed, I forced myself to smile back. But my smile faltered when his grin widened unnaturally, stretching across his face from ear to ear, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. I must have let my horror show, because the manager noticed too. She barely turned her head towards me. "Smile. Back," she ordered, softly, but firmly. I struggled to maintain the smile, staring at this creature, no longer a child, who continued to meet my gaze. It giggled, finally breaking eye contact, grabbed the candy bar, and dashed out of the store. One by one, the rest followed suit. Each one repeated the same unnerving ritual. I felt like a cog in a machine, forced to endure this nightmarish parade, each monstrous child flashing those horrifying smiles as I fought to keep mine intact. Thankfully, it was over quickly, and I was relieved. I started to step away from the counter, but the manager grabbed my arm, yanking me back. "There's still one left. We don't move until it leaves." I nodded silently. In the distance, I could hear it running through the back aisles. This one must have been the troublemaker of the bunch. "I'm gonna find you," it called out in a high-pitched, sing-song voice as it ran. Several minutes passed before it stopped in front of the janitor's closet. It stared at the door, almost like it knew something, before reaching up and pulling on the handle. The cashier tried to hold the door shut, but she didn't stand a chance. The childlike monster shrieked and ripped the door open with a force that sent the cashier sprawling across the floor. It glanced back and forth between her and the other employee, who was on the phone, before taunting them in that same playful voice. "I'm gonna tell on you." Then, laughing, it darted out of the store, not even bothering to grab a candy bar like the others. The cashier lay there unconscious, and the employee peeked out of the closet where the door had once been. He looked at the manager, panic in his eyes. "What now? We've no idea which one of the thousands of kids this thing's gonna wake up, and our friends haven't made it here yet. I think we need to make a run for it." No. You know that's not gonna end well. We have to stay put until this passes or the team arrives. Take the phone, hide behind the aisles, and stay in contact. If we lose touch, damn it, hide. The manager ducked under the counter. The other employee and I bolted to the back corner of the store. As the automatic door slid open again, I glanced back. We had forgotten something. The cashier, still lying on the floor, unconscious and motionless. I tried to go back for her, but the employee grabbed my arm, shaking his head. "Don't. It's too late." My heart sank, but I knew he was right. With trembling legs, I sank to the ground. Silence filled the store, and it became so quiet that we could hear the unmistakable sound of hooves clattering on the hard floor. And then came the laughter, sadistic, dark, and adult. Likely a man's voice. Whatever was coming toward us was heavy, each step deliberate. It was moving down the aisles on the opposite side of the store from where we were hiding, where the cashier still lay. We edged toward the corner of our aisle and peeked out. Emerging from behind the opposite aisle were the legs of what appeared to be a deer, supporting the upper body of a man, or at least something man-like, though I couldn't be sure because it was dressed in a garish red and blue clown outfit. A jester's hat in matching colors sat atop its head. Standing about 6 feet tall, its frame stretched the fabric of the costume taut, revealing its massive bulk. The hands were black, each finger ending in a long, jagged nail. Its face was pale and shiny, almost like it had been painted. The eyes and lips were outlined in black, and its nose was a round, bright red ball. It stopped in its tracks, abandoning both its laughter and movement as soon as it reached the aisle. Right there, in front of the shattered door, and the unconscious cashier lying on the floor. The clown bent down, effortlessly lifting the cashier by her neck, holding her up to its face. It tilted its head, staring at her with curiosity, as though she'd become some kind of peculiar specimen, though it was clear which of the two was truly out of the ordinary. Next to me, the employee whispered hurriedly into the phone, describing the situation. I could faintly hear a voice on the other end, but it was too quiet to catch any specific words. The cashier's eyes fluttered open, and as she registered the sight before her, they widened in sheer terror. She screamed as the clown's grip tightened around her neck. The clown appeared disgusted by the sound, pulling her closer before sinking its teeth into her throat. Her scream was abruptly cut off, her mouth hanging open as silence took over. The clown took another bite, then grabbed her head with its other hand, and in one horrifying motion, tore it from her body. It tossed the head in our direction like it was nothing. Blood sprayed the aisle, like a grim fountain, the head landing just feet away from where we stood. I didn't dare peek again, but it didn't matter. Another round of manic laughter erupted from the clown. "I know you're over there. How about I show you a trick?" Its high-pitched voice rang out unexpectedly, a jarring contrast to the violence. The employee next to me dropped the phone and bolted, trying to escape. He made it only as far as the open space by the counter before the clown moved in front of him, cutting him off. His sprint was broken in an instant, sending him crashing to the floor. The clown was unfazed. It grabbed him by the wrists, lifting him with ease, and with a violent tug, ripped both his arms clean off. The employee's screams echoed through the store as he bled out, helpless on the ground. The clown let out a brief laugh before delivering a brutal kick with its hoof, crushing his skull. I looked down at the phone, hearing faint feedback from the other end. Trembling, I picked it up and whispered in a voice barely my own. "Hello?" The reply was urgent. "Listen, you need to blind it. Check your phone. It'll work now. Turn on the flashlight and aim it at its eyes. Do you hear me?" I pulled out my phone, noticing that it was on, and fully charged even though I hadn't charged it. It made no sense. The clown's voice came again from the center of the store. "Don't think I've forgotten about you. I've got a special trick just for you." I dropped the store phone and, like the other employee, tried to run. I dashed down the aisle, realizing I had no idea where I was even going. In a panic, I reached for my phone again, but it slipped from my grasp and hit the floor. I scrambled to pick it up, frantically trying to turn on the flashlight as the sound of approaching hooves grew louder behind me. Just as I was grabbed and spun around, the flashlight came to life. The clown shrieked, its screams filled with pain and fury as it fled past me into the aisles, tearing down shelves and throwing items in every direction. I kept my phone aimed, the light cutting through the chaos. The clown tripped over a broken shelf, crashing to the ground before springing back to its feet. It lunged at me, but the light caught its eyes again, sending it screaming and stumbling toward the exit. It burst through the doors and disappeared into the night, leaving the store eerily quiet. The manager, who had been hiding behind the counter, finally stood up. Her face drained of color as she took in the scene, the mangled bodies of her coworkers, the blood-soaked floor, but she said nothing about it. Instead, she turned to me. "Where's the phone?" I shut off my cell phone's flashlight, slipping it back into my pocket, and made my way through the carnage to retrieve the store phone. Handing it to her, I noticed she hadn't moved, her eyes still fixed on the bodies in front of her. She took the phone and began speaking to whoever was on the other end, while I stood frozen, too afraid to glance back at the mess we'd just survived. After a few moments of a conversation I wasn't fully following, the manager let out a sigh, this time one of relief. "Oh, thank God. How long?" More talking from the other side. "All right. I can do that. There's still someone else alive. I'll have him watch for your arrival." She set the phone down and turned to me, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "I need you to stand by the door and watch for black SUVs to pull up. When they arrive, yell for me. If they're not who we expect, hide. I have something to do in the back." She picked up the phone again and headed toward the rear of the store. I didn't bother asking questions. Whoever these people were, they had to be our way out. I walked over to the automatic doors and stared out into the empty street. The familiar sight of the road was oddly unsettling in its normalcy, as if nothing had happened at all. In the distance, I could hear the manager tinkering with something in the back, but my mind was racing with everything that had just occurred. It was overwhelming, and I desperately tried to make sense of it all. None of it made sense. Eventually, the black SUVs arrived. Men in tactical gear and formal suits poured out, about 6 from each vehicle. I turned and yelled to the back of the store, "Hey, is this them? They're here!" No response. "Hey!" I called again as I made my way to the back. At the end of the aisle, the store phone lay discarded on the ground. I bent down to pick it up, but before I could, I heard frantic yelling from the other end. "We're here. Do you copy? Our team is entering now. Do you hear us?" I stood up, walking around the corner, only to find the manager lying in a pool of her own blood. Her stomach had been sliced open, and crouching over her was the man from earlier, the tall one in the old-fashioned suit. He no longer wore his hat or coat, just the suit. In his hand, a large knife glinted as he carved into her body. Surrounding him were her organs, freshly removed. He looked up at me, smiled, then returned to his work. "I told you I'd be back for the meat. I don't mind doing the harvest myself." With deliberate care, he pulled her heart from her chest, admiring it for a moment before placing it inside a suitcase by his side. He stood, eyeing me as he wiped the blood from his knife. "You'll give me some fine cuts too, I'm sure." His grin widened as he locked eyes with me. Then, with a grunt of rage, he charged. I turned and bolted for the door, but he stopped in his tracks the moment he saw the men approaching from outside. "Well," he sneered, "aren't you the lucky one tonight?" He slid his knife back into the sheath hidden within his vest, and without a word, turned and walked toward the last aisle. A moment later, he returned, his suitcase in one hand, and the manager's lifeless body slung effortlessly over his shoulder as if she weighed nothing at all. Calmly, he approached the janitor's closet and opened the door that I could have sworn had been ripped off its hinges just minutes before. A blast of cold air escaped, and from the small angle I could see a body hung from a meat hook inside. The man stepped into the closet, casually tossing the manager's body into the freezing room. He then turned to face me one last time, his hand on the door handle. In that same unsettlingly pleasant tone, he bid me farewell. "Good day." The automatic doors behind me slid open as a swarm of men rushed into the store. Immediately, 6 of them aimed their weapons at the closet door. When they finally opened it, all they found was an ordinary janitor's closet, empty, save for cleaning supplies. "Fuck," one of them cursed loudly, kicking over a loaf of bread from a nearby shelf. "We've been hunting that bastard for months. How does he keep slipping away?" Another agent muttered in frustration. The rest of the team swept the store, some bringing in strange equipment I had never seen before. There was so much happening around me, it was impossible to keep track of it all. I did manage to catch glimpses of their work. A few agents carefully gathered stray hairs from the floor, while others used blacklights to trace the footprints left by that hunched-back creature. They even collected the small change and dollar bills the children had paid with. Eventually, 2 large boxes were wheeled in, which they used to collect the bodies of the other workers. I stood there, unnoticed and ignored for several minutes until one of the men in a suit approached me. He wasn't looking for answers. His demeanor made it clear he was delivering a message. "I know this is hard to wrap your head around, and I doubt any of it makes sense to you right now. Unfortunately, there's no way we can explain it in a way that would. I'm truly sorry for whatever you had to see or endure tonight, but there's nothing we can do to change that. These things are terrorizing people all over the world, for reasons we still don't fully understand. This store? It's been targeted 6 times before this, and now tonight makes 7. We're doing everything we can to stop them. We're one of the few groups fighting back. But here's the thing. We need you to keep quiet. If people find out about us, if the wrong ears hear, we'll be shut down, and nothing will ever get fixed. It'll get worse. People will die." He paused, his eyes filled with pity as he took a breath, then pointed toward the store's entrance. "You can leave through those doors whenever you're ready." I didn't respond, but I knew right then I wasn't going to stay silent. What happened to those workers? It had to be told. People deserved to know about this. But in that moment, I kept my thoughts to myself, gave no indication of my intentions. Without a word, I stepped through the automatic doors and out into the night, finding myself standing in front of the street where their vehicles had been. I glanced back at the store. The lights were still on, but it was completely empty. Then I turned back toward the street. The SUVs, all of them, had vanished. People were out again, walking along the sidewalk as if it were any ordinary night. In the distance, I heard the sound of the metro train approaching once more. It was over.